Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. Today I thought I'd do a quick video on some of my favorite baits to fish when you know that a large percentage of the population of bass are on beds. Now, these aren't necessarily bed fishing baits, but there's a group of baits that you really got to concentrate on anytime the spawn is in process. So what that means is you have some fish that are pre-spawn, you got some spawning fish, and you have some post-spawn fish, and they all kind of act a little bit differently. But when the largest percentage of fish are on beds, the pre-spawn and post-spawn fish are also acting in a pretty similar manner. So I want to talk about that today. I want to provide you with some of the baits that I like to use and give you some reasoning as to why I think they're the best option to go with. Now, first and foremost, the one thing that you got to understand is if you've got fish that are either thinking about making a bed, on bed, or in the process of finishing up the spawn. So maybe they're fry guarding, or maybe they're just recovering from the spawning process. Generally, these fish are a little bit more lethargic and they're very, very centered on a home base area, which is usually the bed. So if you've got pre spawn fish, they're thinking about making a bed in a certain location. So they're really hanging tight to certain objects. It may not be the bed itself, but it may be a lay down tree or a dock or something that's really close to it. If the fish is on the bed, obviously that bed is their primary home base. But even after the spawn, the home base a lot of times is still centered around the bed. So if you have fish that are fry guarding, they could be hanging around that same general area. The fry aren't going to go that far. And if you're talking about like big post spawn female, a lot of times they just go find a piece of cover and they hang out by it and they just sit there and they recover for a couple of days. So in all of those instances, targets become much, much more important. And because a lot of times the fish are more lethargic and not really interested in eating, you want a bait that's going to really stay in the strike zone, stay near that home base, if you want to put it that way. So the first thing I want to talk about, and it's pretty straightforward, that's just your typical wacky rig. Wacky rigs are going to be a great, great option anytime you're talking about fishing around the spawn period. Fish have a hard time denying it. It's an easy meal. You can throw it to where the fish are at. Really slow process. This is just the Berkeley Max scent with a core tackle wacky shot, a weedless wacky shot. Great setup. Probably one of those baits you absolutely have to have rigged up during the spawn. Now, along those same lines, you want some sort of flipping bait. So this is the core tackle Ozark with a 4-inch Berkeley Pit Boss. This is one of my go-tos. Just a great, great setup for getting your bait into where those targets are. So in a lot of instances, you guys are sliding on me. In a lot of instances, the fish are back in some cover and you got to get your bait into it. So maybe you have a lay down tree and the fish is in that tree. Well, the Ozark rig is a great presentation for that. And the reason I love this so much during the spawn is it keeps your bait horizontal. So when you pick up on it, the bait scoots, it doesn't go vertical. And in my experience, especially with spawning fish, the fish the fish are much more interested in biting something if it moves horizontal in the water column than if it goes vertical. I don't know exactly why that is, but I think it has to do with the fact that the fish thinks it's a fleeing bait fish or something trying to scoot away. And in reality, the majority of forage species don't go vertical up and down. They go horizontal in the water column when they're trying to get away. So the Ozark rig really does a good job with that. Now, if I'm trying to punch through matted vegetation or I'm trying to uh, fish a bait where I'm flipping way back into a tree and there's a little hole like that, maybe a Texas rig is a better opportunity or a better option at that point. But the Ozark rig just excels during the spawn period. Okay, next up, a popper like the Bullet Pop. This is the Berkeley Bullet Pop. One of the keys to a popper is it's a what I call a target topwater. This is not a bait that I'm going to cast and retrieve for the entire cast. I cast it out at an object. I pop it 5, 6 times. You know, you pop it, let it sit. Pop it, let it sit. You're fishing a strike zone. That is such an important thing during the springtime period. The other thing I want to point out with a topwater is a topwater is an excellent bait at getting fish to show themselves. Again, remember during this time period, a lot of these fish aren't really looking to feed. A lot of them are looking to chase that object away from the bed or away from the fry. And a topwater does a really good job at imitating something that potentially is feeding on fry or is an object or an entity that that bass doesn't want around them. So they'll come up and show themselves, meaning they'll roll under it or come up and look at it, even if they're not looking at eating it. Now, I like a popper because the popper, when you pop it, is very similar to a bluegill sucking something off the surface. When a bluegill goes to feed, it creates a really good opportunity for the bass to take advantage of that bluegill who is feeding. And it also does a really good job of imitating a bluegill that is feeding on bass fry, which makes it an enemy of the bass. So a popper, being that I can throw it at a stump and let it sit there and work it for as long as I want and keep it in the strike zone, really, really good topwater bait for that reason. Another topwater bait, this guy, I've talked about this guy a lot on the channel. This is the spin rocket. This is such a killer prop style bait. The plastic blades on it just give it an entirely different sound than a lot of your other prop style baits. I don't know exactly why this thing just dominates the fish during the springtime period, but they have a really hard time at denying it. Now, if you were to ask me, I think the really fine little sputtering of that prop is really similar to fry that are like scattering on the surface, and therefore the bass see it again as an enemy. But there is something special about a prop style bait during the spawning window for both pre-spawn, post-spawn, and bedding fish that makes this a must-have. And if you see the color I've got, this is like one of my absolute favorite colors. It's MF bluegill. It's just a fantastic bluegill imitating color. Does extremely well. And then if I had one other bait to choose to throw during the spawning process, it's a bigger swim bait. I really like big swim baits, even glide baits, but I feel like I have better action on a single boot tail swim bait. This is the unrigged coal shad. I've got a core tackle tush hook on the inside of this. Killer bait, again, at getting the attention from the fish. Sometimes a bigger profile bait during the spawn is intimidating to bass and they will come out, show themselves. Now, you have a shot at catching some of the biggest females in the lake because it's a bigger bait and they just like a big boot tail during this time. But a lot of times it's similar to a topwater where the fish are coming, they're showing themselves, and you can identify what that object is where they're hanging out. And if they won't eat this or won't eat the topwaters, that's when you throw like the Ozark or the Wacky Rig in there and you can catch them. But a big boot tail like the coal shad is a dynamite lure to throw around during the springtime just to identify where those fish are hanging out. Those baits are like absolute must-have go-tos. Uh, Man, I've caught a lot of fish on every one of these. I'm getting excited. I don't know about you guys. We're gonna have spawning fish here in a few weeks. Things happen really fast in Wisconsin once the ice comes off, and with the weather that we've got coming in, it's gonna start happening fast. So I'm excited. Hopefully, you guys have some of these. If you don't, you might want to pick some up. I'll put links for all these in the video description if you want to check them out. Maybe you want to support the channel, and stay tuned. If you enjoyed today's video, hit the like button, subscribe. I'll see you tomorrow.